All right, let's make a start then. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another NELI Programme webinar. My name's Sarah Hearn, and I work as part of the NELI team at Oxford and Assessment. We'll be here today until about 4:15, and today's session contains lots of practical tips to help you with your NELI delivery. With a particular focus on individual sessions, because we know that practitioners can sometimes find these a little bit intimidating, especially when first starting out with NELI. And as usual, I will finish with a Q&A where I'll answer a few questions that we received via the webinar registration form and via email. But as always, you're very welcome to submit questions into the sort of live Q&A chat box, because our support team is here to help, so they'll be able to answer your questions as they come in. And just lastly, everybody's cameras and microphones are automatically set to off. So to ask a question, you will need to put it into the Q&A. And this webinar is being recorded, so we can share it with yourselves after the webinar, and also with anyone who wasn't able to attend. So to start us off, I would like to talk about Language Screen and how to interpret and use the reports that you get after completing your assessments. So if you've used Language Screen before, you'll know that the assessment is made up of 4 subtests, which measure children's skills in expressive vocabulary, listening comprehension, receptive vocabulary, and sentence repetition. And I just wanted to mention here that those of you who are really familiar with Language Screen may have noticed that there have been some changes to the subtests recently. This is absolutely nothing to worry about. It's actually because the assessment now adapts based on the age of the child. So this means that it's a shorter test for younger children, which we hope will make the assessment process even faster and more enjoyable for you and the children as well. So in terms of reporting, PDF reports can be generated for a whole school, by year, or by class. And all reports include a section at the front that kind of explains everything that you're going to see. Then there's a results summary table, which includes all of the children that you assessed and that you kind of included in the report, and it ranks them by their standard score. Then there's an individual results pages which contain a more detailed language profile for each of the children in the report. So the results summary table that I mentioned gives you a list of all of the children that you've assessed, and ranked by their overall standard score. And this score is really critical because it expresses how well a child is performing compared to other children of their age. We now have well over 500,000 children assessed with Language Screen, and so the standard scores are really accurate because it's based on all of this data. And just to explain this sort of term standard score a little bit more, a score of 100 means that that child's language skills are completely average for their age. Below 100 means that their language skills, are less well developed for their age, and above 100 means that they're sort of performing better than average. But to make it easier for you guys, we use a traffic light system with red, amber, and green symbols. This in the reports, red means that the child has what we would consider to be really clear language difficulties, and essentially they're in the bottom 10% of their age, or they have a standard score of 81 or below. If they get an amber score, this means that there's sort of some concerns. Their language skills are in the bottom 10 to 25% for their age, or they have a standard score of between 82 and 89. And if they get green, then they're sort of better than the bottom 25% for their age, or they have a standard score of 90 or above. This absolutely doesn't mean that they wouldn't benefit from taking part in an intervention like NELI. If all of your children are scoring green, we still recommend that you deliver the intervention to those who are at the bottom. But it just means that if they're green, then they're sort of not as much of a priority as if you have children who are scoring amber or red. The individual report page provides a clear visual breakdown of the children's performance by subtest. So here, for example, you can see that Albert's overall score was 73, which puts him in the sort of clear concern category. And the graph also shows us that although Albert's receptive vocabulary and sentence repetition skills seem to be particularly poor, he did perform better on the listening comprehension subtest. But really the key bit to focus on here is the kind of the overall language screen standard score. As you can see, the report also provides some explanatory information to help understand what's assessed in each of the subtests, along with a summary of the child's language profile, which is based on their assessment. And this report is available instantly. As soon as you click upload at the end of an assessment, the data is there and you can pull a report when you log in. And we hope that it can be used as a sort of helpful communication tool for parents and guardians or speech and language therapists as needed. So let's talk about how you'll measure and monitor progress in the NELI programme next. So as I've already discussed, Language Screen will help you to identify the children who will most likely benefit from receiving the intervention, and so assign your NELI groups. But the second assessment that you'll complete at the end of the year will show you how the NELI children's language skills have progressed over the 20 weeks compared to their non-NELI peers. And it also provides helpful information about all of the children's language ability to pass up to the next year's teaching team. And just one thing to add here is that assessing your whole cohort gives you a much sort of richer comparison between the progress of your NELI and non-NELI children. And if you've attended lots of webinars, you'll have seen this graph on the right before. But in case it's new to anyone, just to illustrate this point, there's one school here that we've kind of used here as an example. And as you can see, there's a substantial gap between the average language screen, or sorry, the median language screen scores of non-NELI and NELI children before the intervention, which is on the left. And as I mentioned earlier, the scores are standardised according to age. So if they're kind of at the level that would be expected, then their score should be sort of 100 or higher, which the scores for most of the non-NELI children in the dark green are. But then after the intervention on the right, the gap between the scores for the two groups has lessened considerably, with the NELI children's scores averaging more around the 100 mark as they've caught up with their peers, which is obviously quite remarkable improvement over the two terms of NELI. But in order to be able to kind of see that comparison and see how they've improved in comparison to their peers, you need to assess the whole cohort, or at least more than just the NELI children. All right, so then aside from Language Screen, there are a range of paper assessments that you can use to track sort of specific aspects of the children's development throughout NELI. So we've got the assessment of narrative, speech and grammar, the attitude and behaviour record sheet, and in part 2, there's also a taught letter sounds progress assessment. And all of these can be found at the back of the teaching handbooks. And the purpose of all of these assessments is to monitor progress, but they also enable you to see and also to demonstrate to others the ongoing impact of the programme. So I'll talk a little bit more about how to go about the main paper assessment, which is the assessment of narrative, speech and grammar, a little bit later. So now that we understand the assessments used in the NELI programme, let's move on to looking at the sessions themselves. So lots of you will already know, NELI uses a recurring schedule of small group and individual sessions, with each session building on the content of the one before to carefully scaffold the children's learning over 20 weeks. Both strands of the intervention work in tandem to provide a sort of a really supportive and reassuring environment for the NELI children to explore and practice their developing language skills. And as likely sort of many of you will already know, many of the NELI children don't yet have the language skills that they need to sort of fully access the whole class teaching or interact with their peers, which can obviously be quite a frustrating and isolating experience. But the lovely thing about the small group and the individual sessions is that they provide a kind of safe space for the children to kind of try and fail and then try again and ultimately learn to succeed. And they also allow the children to build a trusting relationship with the NELI practitioner, which plays a really vital role in building their language skills, but also their emotional well-being as well. So group sessions, of which there are 3 per week in the NELI timetable, are fully scripted in the teaching handbooks, and they move through the programme materials at quite a steady pace. There's lots of opportunities for consolidation and overlearning, which is ideal for children who need just that little bit more time and effort to learn than their peers might. Individual sessions, which each NELI child should ideally receive twice per week, allow NELI practitioners to tailor their teaching and target specific areas of weakness or build on areas of strength for the child as well. And so in addition to the core language elements of the intervention, which is vocabulary and narrative skills, both group and individual sessions also work to develop children's active listening skills. So I think we all know Ted, who is our friendly NELI mascot. Ted provides reassurance and fun to NELI sessions, but he does also act as a powerful tool for encouraging active listening and good behaviour via his listening rules and his Best Listener award. And it does work. It's been shown in RCTs that the children who participate in NELI show better behaviour in class as rated by teachers. So those sort of active listening and good behaviour skills they're learning in their sessions does kind of go out into the classroom as well. So as I mentioned at the start, I'm going to focus now a little bit on individual sessions because I know that these can be an area of the programme which practitioners can feel a little bit more unsure about. So individual sessions follow the same overall structure as the group sessions. There's an introduction, then there's sections on vocabulary and narrative, and then there's a plenary. In the second half of the programme, so from week 11 to week 20, there's also a short additional section in which you will revise letter sounds and practice phonological awareness. The individual sessions are 15 minutes long, more or less, and in part 2, the time for this, the additional element that I just mentioned, is created by shortening the other sections. So it's not on top of it, it doesn't get longer in part 2, it should be 15 minutes all the way through. Okay, so now let's do a little bit of a deep dive into the 2 main sections of the individual sessions, which is vocabulary and narrative. And let's start with vocabulary. So it has been found that vocabulary at age 5 is a very strong predictor of qualifications achieved at school leaving age. So this is just one fact that kind of demonstrates how absolutely crucial it is that we work to boost vocabulary levels in the early years. And this is why it's a principal focus of the NELI intervention. So in the vocabulary section, the idea is to revise the special words which you've introduced in previous group sessions with your activities tailored according to each child's needs. So, for example, if the child has been poorly and off school, you might want to introduce them to any special words from group sessions that they've missed. Or you might have spotted that they were struggling with a special word in the last group session, so you might want to spend a little bit of time securing this word with them. Or if you think they're feeling really confident with the special words introduced so far, you've seen them using them in context really easily, then you might want to extend their understanding of the new vocabulary, or you might do a combination of these things. And this is kind of where the power of the individual session lies, which is in your ability as a practitioner to focus on exactly what is the next step for each child. So in the group session, just as an example, you may notice that some children sort of copy the special words, or they might use the words in context during the activity, but then think, how can we support those children to kind of generalize that learning so that they can use the words outside the session, during their play, or obviously even later in their writing as well. And the thing is here is that children need to hear words many times in a range of meaningful contexts in order to kind of secure that really rich meaning of the word. And the idea is that the individual sessions provide opportunities for the children to kind of really cement that learning, embed the special words in their memory. Um, and it's only kind of when the words are really secure that children will use the vocabulary kind of spontaneously in their talk outside of sessions in the classroom. So for children who already understand and use the special words with confidence, the individual sessions then are your chance to kind of explore how the vocabulary can be extended or used in a range of different contexts to secure a sort of a deeper meaning. And there's really lots of opportunity to get creative in this section. The activities you use to secure or extend the special words with the child are really up to you. There's no right or wrong. It's just as long as the child is being given lots of chances to repeat and practice the special words in context. Okay, so the other principal section of the individual sessions focuses on narrative development. But again, before we go into talking about how to deliver the narrative element, it's important to explain why NELI works to develop children's narrative skills. And this is that building narratives is much, much more difficult for children with weak oral language skills. They need to be able to use their kind of higher level language skills, including sequencing, to retell a story or to recall an event. And it's not really very long until we're expecting children to start writing stories. So it's crucial that we can kind of promote these opportunities to develop oral narrative skills as early as possible. So to prepare for this element of the sessions, in the first 2 days of the programme, before you start your group and individual sessions, you should complete the assessment of narrative speech and grammar with each of your NELI children. And this is the one that I mentioned earlier, which can be found at the back of your teaching handbooks. At the end of the assessment, it should take about 5 minutes or so. At the end of the assessment, you should set 3 targets. For example, in this record form, hopefully you can see it circled in red over here, the practitioner has decided to target the use of past tense, use of pronouns, and identifying a character in the story. The assessment supports target setting so that we can select the next steps that are appropriate for the child's stage of language development. And on the hub, you will find a range of targets that you can select from, for example, to develop story content, story structure, sequencing, and grammar, and so on. Now, to do this assessment, you should use one of the 3 sequence picture story cards or personal events narrative prompt cards that are in your NELI Pack flashcards. It doesn't matter which one you use, but we do recommend that you use the same one each time you conduct the assessment to enable you to kind of look back at progress over the course of the programme. You'll then use the narrative section of the individual sessions to develop the child's narrative skills and work towards those targets that you set in the assessment. And we recommend that you reassess the children with this assessment of narrative speech and grammar at least at the middle and end of NELI, so at the end of week 10 and then at the end of week 20. But actually, you can complete the assessment whenever you think the child has met their targets, or if you'd like to complete it more often, another point to aim for is at the end of each topic of NELI as well. Okay, so into the sort of nuts and bolts of delivering the narrative section. So each week you'll choose a new story prompt. So again, it's either those 3 sequence picture stories or the personal event narrative prompt card. Then in the first individual session of the week, ask the child to tell you their story using the prompt and write it down in the record form. Then model it back to them at just a slightly higher level of language. And by modelling, I mean that you scaffold the child's responses by repeating what they've said to you and then either kind of adding a word or an idea to expand their story, or recasting the grammar so that the child hears it back with the correct grammar. So just to give you an example of this, if a child's story for the sequence that's on the slide was cats look at string and getted string and then stuck in string, you might model back the cat looked at the string, then he got the string, now he is stuck in the string. Then in the second individual session of the week, we recommend that you start by reading the child's first story back to them, again, modelling it at just that slightly higher level of language. Then work with them to improve it, bearing in mind the narrative targets that you set for them in their last assessment of narrative speech and grammar. Then finish off by writing down the new and improved version of that story on the record sheet. We really hope that you'll find that the children kind of love hearing their stories being read back to them during that sort of second session of the week, and seeing their confidence grow. And just a tip here is that you might like to almost overpraise their efforts, especially at the start when it's all very new to them. Okay, so that was sort of an overview of how individual sessions are delivered throughout the bulk of the 20 weeks of delivery. And I know that many of you on the webinar today will have already started delivery, but some of you may be yet to start as well. And I just wanted to take this moment to say that if you haven't started yet, there's still plenty of time. I really strongly encourage you to just get going as soon as you can, and deliver as much of the programme as you can. Even if there isn't time, in the end, to kind of deliver the full 20 weeks of the programme, the time that you spend on the intervention this year will still be beneficial for the children. And importantly, it will also kind of help you get your feet under the table, so that you're ready to get going a bit earlier next year. So just with this in mind, I thought it would be helpful to have a quick look at the very first week of NELI in a little bit more detail, because it's slightly different from the rest of the weeks in the programme. So where possible, we recommend that you start your NELI programme on a Monday. And as you can see, the first 2 days are set aside for you to complete the assessment of narrative speech and grammar, and any other paper assessments or other assessments that you're using with each child in your NELI group. To be honest, don't worry, it's not going to take 2 whole days. It's really just 5 minutes or so for each child if all you're doing is the assessment of narrative speech and grammar. So you shouldn't need 2 full days. And as discussed earlier, this assessment will give you a good indication of the level of language skill that each child has, or sort of narrative abilities that each child has, and that will enable you to kind of set appropriate narrative targets right from the start of the programme. And you can find useful demonstration videos of these initial narrative assessment sessions on the Delivery Support Hub from steps 12 to 16. And we've also provided example completed assessment sheets as well, which match the assessments that were completed in the video. So you can kind of see how one relates to the other. Then on the third day, the Wednesday, you'll deliver the first NELI group session. The structure, the content, and the format of the group sessions are laid out in detail in the NELI handbooks. And the structure and timings are slightly different from the rest of the group sessions, as the children are introduced to the programme and no vocabulary is taught in that very first session. Again, you can also find really useful demonstration videos of the group sessions in the Delivery Support Hub on step 11. The first video on that step is a session 1, and that's the first time that our NELI practitioner shows the TED puppet to the children and introduces the days of the week, the listening rules, the best listener sticker, and the board. So we hope that provides a little bit of inspiration for your own first session. Then we recommend that you begin individual sessions with each of the children on the 4th day, so usually a Thursday. And the structure and timings of the first individual session are slightly different from the rest, because the children won't have any vocabulary to learn yet. They won't have been introduced to any in the previous group session. And this first session is really just an opportunity for the children to kind of get used to the session format, to the location, feeling secure in their learning environment and kind of understanding what's expected of them. So after looking at the listening rules and playing a listening game, a good session plan might be to share the Ted and his big ball story that you read in the first group session. But there's no need for any sort of story prompt or any formal record keeping for this first session. Then the rest of the individual sessions follow the standard kind of full structure and timings that I talked through earlier. Then on the Friday, you deliver the second group session, and by now we hope that you'll kind of be in the swing of your NELI delivery and it will be a little bit less daunting. And the second week then falls into the normal pattern that you'll follow for the rest of the remaining 19 weeks. All right, so before we wrap up, I just wanted to remind everyone of the NELI community that is available to you as you sort of get going or continue with your delivery. So firstly, the Delivery Support Hub is really a fantastic resource. There you can watch real group and individual sessions and assessment sessions in action, and you can download accompanying record forms so that you can see exactly how one leads onto the other, as I mentioned earlier. There are also optional session plans available for every individual session in NELI. So if you want a little bit of inspiration, especially towards the beginning, these can help you plan your sessions. And then finally, the course and the hub are there to help you connect with your NELI community, which is everybody on this call today. There are literally thousands of other people enrolled on the training and the hub who you can ask for support, including our NELI mentors. So please do take a look. All right, so that's it for the presentation portion of the session. So for the remaining time, I'll just address a few questions that were submitted to us earlier. And just a reminder, obviously you can ask questions by submitting them into the Q&A as well. I can see some questions coming in, so that's great. So the first question here is, if the children are confident in their phonic sounds, do they need to continue to part 2 of the NELI programme? So the short answer is yes, absolutely. But the slightly longer answer, I'd actually want to start by sort of taking a bit of a step back and kind of emphasising that NELI it's an oral language intervention. It's not a phonics programme. So the very short letter sounds and phonological awareness element that is introduced in part 2 is a really very small part of the programme, but it is going to benefit children for whom sort of the repetition and consolidation of what they've already been taught is really incredibly important for their progress. None of the sort of 3 to 4 minutes that you'll spend on this in a session, it will be new for the NELI children. It's just a chance for them to have that overlearning, and especially for those children who are already confident, it's a bit of a confidence boost for them as well, which is no bad thing. And it's not in conflict with any of the phonics that you'll already be teaching. So yes, absolutely, please keep the children through the entire part of the programme. All right, so then the next question is, do I go over both sets of vocabulary from the group sessions on Fridays and Mondays in the Tuesday individual session? So although you would mostly reinforce the group session vocabulary in the sort of the next individual session, you should basically choose whichever vocabulary the child needs reinforcing the most. So if on Tuesday you kind of think, oh, they didn't really grasp Friday's words, but they were okay with Mondays, then work on the Friday's words in your Tuesday session. That's absolutely fine. Or you can do a bit of a combination. Just depends on what you think works best for the child. Okay, and the last question is, how often do I change the story prompt that's used in the individual sessions? So for this, we recommend that you use a new story prompt every week. So the child tells their story in the first session, and then you improve it together in the second session. And then in the following week, you would choose a different story prompt. If you feel they would benefit from kind of going over the story again, you can use it again. But it's nice to keep things fresh as well and give them something new to work with. So we wouldn't really recommend using it so more than sort of 2 weeks in a row. However, when you do the assessment of narrative speech and grammar, which is that sort of 5-minute assessment that you would do at least at the start, the middle and end of NELI, that is where you should be using the same prompt each time. And the reason for that is it means that you can look back on the child's versions of that story over time and see their progress. All right, so thank you very much, everyone. That brings us to the end of our time together, bang on time. So please keep an eye out for invitations to future webinars, as always. I've just realised I need to sort my slides. Um, and please do get in touch with us if you have ideas for topics that you would like us to cover in the webinars, or if you would like us to showcase your school's NELI delivery. We're always happy to hear from schools. So please do email us if you would like to be part of a case study or even future webinars. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.